There's nothing more permanent than temporary. Everyone knows this saying in the USSR. They knew it too, but they kept forgetting. There are many examples of this. Well, let's talk about the bus. Yes, this bus was created as a temporary solution. The ZIS-155 became an intermediate and, as I mentioned, a temporary solution. One ZIS-154 bus was retired. And it wasn't retired because it was outdated, but because it was ahead of its time. On one hand, it was too progressive in its design, and on the other hand, it was too raw. Well, who hasn't heard about hybrid cars today? But it turns out that in the USSR in 1946, diesel-electric buses ZI-154 were created. Let's find out what this marvel of technology is. Behind the backs of the rear seats is the power unit, a diesel generator. With the Yaroslavl diesel engine, a DC generator was used on the ZIS buses. I start the engine, and that's where everything bus-related in this ZIS ends. There are two pedals, just like in a trolleybus. The reverse of the electric motor is controlled by a switch. This particular specimen served as a shed at a dacha in the Moscow region for many decades. Yes, we are from the past. The noise, smoke, and complexity of the design condemned 154th model. The 155 is, in essence, essentially a more simplified version of the modern bus of that time, in terms of design and functionality. And yes, the new vehicle was still being designed. I'm talking about the ZIL-158. In the Soviet Union, events were often scheduled on significant dates, like the release of the Liaz-158 bus during the 21st Congress of the CPSU. The 21st Congress of the CPSU. You've really had enough already. The ZS-155 bus went into production in 1949. They set up production very quickly, as it was already mentioned that the basis of everything was the previous bus. The factory named after Stalin, ZIS, produced a conditionally new vehicle, and ZIS was once the Renault AMA, one of the oldest vehicles of construction enterprises in the Russian Empire, and later in USSR. I hope you understood which factory we're talking about. A bus with a wagon layout. There is no other and better solution even today. And if buses ever take to the skies, perhaps in the not-so-distant future, they will also have a wagon layout. And most likely they will be like this, because here the body is load-bearing. Just a minute. And the magic. A magnet is a piece of metal that naturally attracts iron and steel. Let's watch close. Let's move on. The aluminum base of the bus is kind of a frame, not a frame. If we understand that the frame, part of it goes there, part runs over the wheels, and in the front part of the engine compartment. So the body doesn't have a longitudinal frame. This led to the bus simply breaking in half after 4 or 5 years. They repaired it, and the bus body would last for another year or two, and then it would be scrapped. Aluminum. Everywhere, aluminum. Actually, it's not aluminum, but it's like duralumin. If you look at the skeleton of the car, you won't find a frame as such. The profiles are riveted into the structure, installed at the necessary angles. They resemble miniature bridge spans more, and it's these that form the lower part. And from there, upwards, the frames of the pillars that form the walls go up. The stringers meet under the arch of the roof, forming a dome. So that's how I decided to describe the bus frame. A regular aluminum frame, which was assembled with rivets and bolts. By the way, as you might have noticed, the aluminum sheets were also carefully and securely riveted on. True, only on the sides. The front, rear, and sides and roof are made of high-quality steel. It was precisely thanks to the thin metal that such a whimsically elegant body shape was created. This form did not appear out of nowhere. Unfortunately, it wasn't born from the pen of Soviet artists. Let me remind you that since the 1930s, global automotive trends have been driven by America. Type E into the search engine. Lukoch, excuse my English, you'll understand everything right away. The most striking and outstanding feature is the composite windshield with monumental pillars and a huge eyebrow arch. Why such an exquisite touch? I don't know. On top there must be windows with signs showing the route, and above the roof there are colorful route indicators. They consist of 3 lights in various colors: red, orange, green, and blue. Using various different combinations of 4 colors on the 3 lights, it was possible to indicate a quite large number of routes. In the dark, they can be seen very much earlier than you can read the route. And this is the emblem that people have nicknamed the herring. It features the Palace of Soviets, which was intended to be built on the site of the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, along with the red Soviet flag with a star. So no one will ever open this little door for you. And I'll show you the radiator, access to the engine. Do you see how off-center it is? The driver's legs, relay, the cabin ventilation, which is naturally opened from the driver's seat so that the legs can be cooled in the heat. Well, and the pedal assembly, you can actually see the mechanism indeed, as well as the shift lever, clearly. The length of the car itself is just over 8 meters. It's shorter than its predecessor. That one was 1.5 meters longer. And there's an explanation for that, but I'll get to it a bit later. On the left side, there are a full 7 windows and they open. On the right, 5. The entry and exit are facilitated through accordion doors, which are very narrow in their operation and functionality, in nature and structure. What didn't you like about the bus? Very high steps, that's 1, and very narrow doors, that's 2. The width of the door opening is approximately 720 millimeters, and when you enter the cabin, ceiling height is almost 2 meters. Can you imagine if the bus bounces on something? But the cabin is bright. There are oval portholes on the roof on both sides. There are interior lights by the handles, but no hatches. Ventilation is through the opened windows and ventilation openings. The soft seats are designed for 28 people, but according to the passport, it can accommodate a total of 50 passengers. Overall, the seats are comfortable if you're not traveling for too long. The windows open. It's very convenient. Everything is finished with chrome metal, cardboard, and painted. It's primitive, but keep in mind that the Great Patriotic War just recently ended. And back in those days, the floor in the bus is made of plywood. The plywood is 15 millimeters thick and is treated with a special resinous compound to make it water resistant. Well, on top there's a rubber mat. By the way, it was relatively warm in the cabin during winter, but only at the front. There are 3 liquid heaters installed here, connected in series. So the very last one is barely warm. The ZIS 155 is one of the first Soviet buses to have shock absorbers installed on the rear axle. They were lever type, and the rear overhang is quite large, 2,700 millimeters. The rear axle supports the body with leaf springs. The bridge itself is made of cast iron. Everything at the front feels just as familiar. A forged beam in the shape of an I section. Leaf springs, lever type shock absorbers, and kingpins. There's really not much to say, it's just a truck as it is. The driver has his own entrance, or rather a nest that you have to elegantly hop into. Who makes steps like this? It's just, you know, kind of a slippery little corner. Just a slippery little corner. Without a little hole for the foot. It's a bit tricky at first, even though the door opening, just look how wide it is, even though it might seem otherwise. This is just some kind of luxury. It's basically a foreign ohar. That's probably what Soviet drivers thought when they got behind the wheel of a bus after driving ZIS-5 trucks and 1.5 tonners. And that's when I realized why the eyebrow arch is needed. Up here, this little lever is for the pull-down ventilation for the airflow, so to speak, in the cabin. If they were standing straight, water would get into them. And here, you know, it doesn't get clogged. The little clocks. Ventilation on the roof. Interior lighting. Look at all the space. Well, first of all, there's a lot of room in the shoulders. Secondly, it's bright. And thirdly, the seat is soft and adjustable in 3 directions. There are minimal instruments since there's not much to monitor. Primitive and reliable. So the controls are all straightforward. The speedometer, brake system pressure, ammeter, and warning lights with Russian letters. The activation mechanism is all with exhaust clickers. On the right-hand side, there's a distinct and clear feature for monitoring the current water temperature, because we know, and also the pressure of something. 1978 year. I don't know. Well, that's it. In short, simply enough already. Just the engine on the right is the main difference between the 155 and the 154. The power unit was located at the rear. Here, they took a simple and primitive approach. But if you look closely, the engine is positioned with a significant shift to the right and at an angle, and the drive shaft runs diagonally to the axle. Here, a 6-cylinder carburetor engine ZS-124 is installed, which is essentially a modified version of the engine from the ES-150 truck. It's a 5.5L 6-cylinder engine, 95 HP at 2,800 RPM. The power is 95 horsepower at 2,800 revolutions per minute. Music is indeed a universal language that connects us all. I want to clearly and explicitly point out the significant, potentially dangerous excessive noise, and the harmful fumes in the workplace environment right away. At the same time, it's certainly quite spacious and undeniably extremely comfortable here. Can you imagine? As you know, I've already said this, historically speaking, vehicle operators would get into these buses after driving ZIS-5 trucks and 1.5 tonners in the past. Foreign car! The maximum speed that the bus can achieve when fully loaded, which is over 9 tons, is approximately 65 kilometers per hour. But it was recommended not to go faster than 50 kilometers per hour, and that was a good speed for a city bus. And to reach that coveted 50, you really have to indeed put in some effort. A 5-speed transmission with short gears and double clutching is probably the most incredibly tiring thing about the bus. The fuel consumption on a flat stretch at a speed of approximately 50 kilometers per hour was 33 liters per 100 kilometers of gasoline per hour. In reality, the fuel just flew out the exhaust, and a 150-liter tank didn't last very long. The braking distance, and the brakes here are air brakes, is very sharp and aggressive. So, 50 kilometers per hour, it's 13 meters. And probably you can get used to them. And most likely they are good for leisurely moving around the city. The city was supposed to be that one. I mean, to be that one. The 60s. Throughout the 1950s, ZIS 155 was the main city bus in the USSR. A total of 21,041 buses were produced. The bus operated in major cities of the Union, and some were even used on suburban routes. In 1957, when the ZIL 158 went into production, it was longer and more comfortable, but in essence, remained the same ZIS. Well, I got the hang of it, and the cubature is very pleasing in a song-like way. I don't know if I mentioned it. I mean, I really don't recall if I explicitly mentioned that there's absolutely no heater whatsoever in the entire cabin, especially in the driver's cabin at all. Well, you just have to try to survive however you can. Well, most likely some hot air from the engine, along with dust and noise, seeps in here. Well, the bus is new. It doesn't smell like anything yet. See, there's no dust. But driving it is a real pleasure. The steering wheel is indeed very wide. You literally have to quite stretch to reach the edge. Extremely. Well, it's running, the little rascal, it's running. Well, here we are in the cabin. It's noisy and bumpy. I have to shout. And I'll shout, passenger transport. The first bus depot, thank you. These cars live in a museum. They are wonderful. And the hunt literally continues.